Hi, everyone, and in this video, we're going to discuss the uses of a performance appraisal. So from an HR planning perspective, performance appraisals are important because they support other HR functions. Those functions such as planning, selection, training, and compensation. They also have a bearing on the past, present, and future of the organization, as well as the careers of the employees within your workforce. So, in going through the different functions of a performance appraisal, we first have to discuss the selection, where whenever you're creating a performance appraisal, you always have to ask yourself, is the selection criteria in place effective? So whenever we are selecting our employees, once those employees are hired within our organization, is that selection criteria effective? If we look back on the selection criteria of employees that have stayed with the organization, that have tenure, if we look at the employees that have left the organization, is that selection criteria effective, or is there room for improvement? Next, we need to ask ourselves, are the assessment tests that we use to select our new employees effective? And are they meaningful as it ties to the actual role within the organization? So, for example, if we have placement tests for hourly workers, is that placement test effective to retain those employees? Another thing from a selection perspective that we should ask ourselves is, are the people that are selected good at their jobs in which they were hired for? So that goes back to those placement tests. That goes back to the onboarding. Did we effectively set up those employees for success? So that's some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves from a selection perspective when we're looking and creating and setting up our performance appraisal. Moving on to the planning and training. Additional questions we should ask when we're setting up this performance appraisal is, are the employees capable of doing their jobs? So if we continue to have issues, if we continue to have remediation for those employees, maybe we should increase the training, maybe we should modify the training for those employees. So we need to assess that, because in some areas, in many situations, we have issues within the workforce because we did not set up those employees for success. And that all goes back to training and preparing those employees, right? So we also need to assess, we need to look back on, for those employees that do very well with their jobs, what were some of the things that they done differently? What were some of the things that how we prepared them differently than those employees that struggle, right? So whenever we go to employee to performance appraisals essentially identify the strengths and weaknesses for those employees whenever we actually do those periodic evaluations. And then they also identify opportunities to improve upon for the future. So moving on to rewards, compensation, and planning. If rewards and compensation are based on performance, we also have to assess if the rewards and compensation are at the appropriate level for performance. Yes, we may be issuing rewards. Yes, we may be issuing raises, but do the employees have an effective targets to look toward when we're looking at rewards and compensation? If employees are not performing at an acceptable level, do we increase those rewards? Do we increase that compensation? And that's other questions that we have to assess. And whenever we're talking about rewards and compensation, we also need to look at promotions. Is it clearly defined what the employees have to do in order to receive a promotion? Those employees that actually have received promotions, we can assess what they did, and that way those employees that have room for improvement, we can reflect back and kind of take a page out of the book of the successful employees and see if we can have those tools, those skills, those traits that will be transferable to those employees that have room for improvement. So as we go through this performance appraisal process, we also must consider the environmental factors that come into play, such as laws, such as unions, such as the overall corporate culture. So some of the things that we should consider is going to begin with legal. And just as with the selection process, we need to ensure that the appraisal process is free of discrimination and does not have adverse impacts on protected groups, on minority groups, on groups such as that will take that ensure that it does not take gender, race, and sex into account. So those are some of the legal aspects that we need to consider when we're talking about performance appraisals. Also, things to consider from a performance appraisal process is going to be unions. So within this course, we're going to talk quite a bit about unions, and labor unions overall will try to downplay the role of performance appraisals in that unions try to emphasize seniority as a primary factor when making performance appraisal decisions for promotions as well as human resource decisions. So corporate culture. So when we look at corporate culture, we always want to view that we always want to view from a holistic perspective that the organization must value the group over the individual performance. Now when we talk about performance appraisals, a lot of HR professionals, a lot of leaders in organizations, sometimes will overlook that. But ultimately, it takes the actual entire workforce as opposed to the whole the individual, okay, within the workforce. So additional considerations that are taken into account during the performance appraisal process is going to be performance appraisal goals. So performance appraisal goals is how the overall performance appraisal system can be reviewed. And then that way we can look at the individual aspects of the performance appraisal. So again, we have the 50,000 foot view of the performance appraisal of what we're trying to achieve. What is the goal of the entire performance appraisal process? And then we look to break that down. So that's one thing that we need to look at, where we have to look at the overall goal and then try to drill down into this performance appraisal process. Other things that we need to take into account is the performance appraisal criteria. So the performance appraisal criteria is essentially what standards that we are looking at, so that everyone within the organization, regardless of role, regardless of department, is essentially measured on the same accord. So that's very important whenever we're thinking about raises, thinking about promotions, to ensure that the compensation is fair across all departments. Okay, so with that, we need to ensure that all of the traits and behaviors across all employees, across all roles, across all departments are the same, including all of the competencies as well as the goal achievement for all of those individuals. Okay, so also we need to look at the responsibility of the appraisal. So we want to say who is responsible for conducting the performance appraisal. Now, although the HR department is responsible for designing, implementing, and coordinating the performance appraisal, typically the employee's immediate supervisor is going to be the one that actually goes through with the performance appraisal. Now, in other videos, we're going to discuss that there are other approaches, other methods that are used in the performance appraisal, including an appraisal approach where we not only do we get the immediate supervisor, but we also get input from the employee's peers, as well as the clients, as well as the suppliers to get input for that employee's appraisal. And then finally, we need to assess the appraisal period. So how long does this performance appraisal take place, right? Or when does this performance appraisal take place? In a number of cases, this performance appraisal is going to take place at the end of the employee's probationary period. So within a number of organizations, you will have a probationary period where all of your skills are assessed, and in many cases, this performance appraisal will take place at the end of that period. Also, you will have defined time box periods, time frames, where performance appraisals will take place quarterly. It will take place semi-annually, but in most cases, in many organizations around the world, you will have annual performance appraisals. So that's all we're going to be reviewing in this video, and until next time.